evening, Demon fans, and welcome back to the Demonland podcast. My name is Andy, and after 5 consecutive weeks at the top of the AFL ladder, the D's have been unceremoniously dumped and currently sit in second place. However, depending on how the results fall this week, including our own match, we could sit as low as 5th by round's end. Easy come, easy go. Joining me tonight is longtime Demonlander George. Good evening, George.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening, listeners. And this week we're going to work out what's wrong with the Melbourne Football Club and hopefully Andy's MFC SS as well.
It's going to take a lot of curing to cure that. You're going to need a prescription.
Well, I've got the prescription. I found the cause at last after a lot of research.
Also joining us tonight, also a long-time Demonlander as well. I should give him that credit too. B-Man, good evening. How are you?
Good evening, Andy. Good evening, George. Good evening, Demonlanders. And Sydney have had their COVID outbreak, and down here in Melbourne town, we've had our MFC SS outbreak, our mid-season outbreak.
It's sort of. I remember even in the sort of late 80s, early 90s, when we were playing finals quite regularly, there would always be that. We always seem to have like a mid-season slump, and this might be our mid-season slump. And hopefully we can get out of it quickly and, barrel forward into the finals. But tonight I'll be taking a bit of a backseat and moderating the show because, full disclosure, in a very rare occurrence, I was not able to watch this week's match due to an unavoidable scheduling of a flight back from a holiday that I was not involved in the booking of. The flight was organised months ago as part of the family a trip and an extended family trip, and as the AFL fixture is being doled out on a week-to-week basis at the moment, there was simply no way I or anyone else could have foreseen the scheduling clash. The match actually spanned the entirety of my flight, and despite B-Man, you imploring me to watch the replay blind, I have neither the maturity nor the self-control to not peek at the scores, and I was so deflated by the result once upon landing that I couldn't bring myself to watch it. I've seen a couple of highlights here and there. I believe this is about the only second time in over 2 decades or more, going back to my own footy playing days, that I haven't seen us play live. And I'm not proud of that, and I wasn't going to front up tonight, but the boys implored me to do so, and so here we are. Hopefully the positivity of these guys can see me through the show and provide me some solace that this isn't the beginning of the end of the D-train juggernaut. Boys, is there anything positive that you can tell me, help me get me out of this funk?
I've got one positive for you, Andy. I'm very glad you didn't take my advice and watch that game as live. Your trip back from Queensland, you get through the COVID fug at the airport, and you get back home and you put your KO on, and then you watch Melbourne struggle for the first half as if we didn't turn up. Not really put in much more of a huge effort in the third quarter, and then finally arrive. As if we were playing a 3:00 game for the last quarter and not be able to get it done. So I'm pleased that you didn't take my advice on this particular one.
Well, are we in? We're talking about the mid-season slump. Are we in a mid-season slump? If you look at the last few weeks, you go back to the Adelaide game. We then came back and we had some great wins against some quality opposition. We've lost to Collingwood, another bottom team. We've now lost. We had that win against Essendon. It wasn't the most convincing of wins. And then we've had this loss this week. Is this a slump, or is it something different? Can we get out of it? George, I might start with you.
Yeah, I think the mid-season slump is across all the clubs at the moment. There was an article in The Age, I think it was today, talking about how most clubs are kicking a lot less goals in the game compared to the start of the season. We're down on average 2 goals a game, and for a team that's only winning games by a couple of goals. In any case, that's a critical change in the outcomes for us. So we're starting to see games being a lot closer. We're starting to see also with other clubs some really strange outcomes during the match. I watched the Collingwood Saints game. Collingwood hadn't scored. I think they scored 1 goal in a half. Port Adelaide Hawthorn was a remarkable game. Hawthorn kicked the first goal, and then Port kicked the next 9, and then Hawthorn kicked the next 5. You know that what we're seeing is this inconsistency, be it caused by the length of the season or post by blues, whatever it might be called, but teams and individual players just aren't playing their best at the moment. So hopefully we've had our couple of marginal types of games, and we can come out of it a lot better. Certainly, it's all up to us this week. We're being challenged now for our position on the ladder as a result of the loss. So it's all before us once again. We shouldn't be depending, as the club has learnt in the last couple of years, not to depend on other clubs dropping games to keep us where we are. It's quite simple this week. We win against Port, we stay where we are, and it needs to continue that way. So it's up to the players on the field now to use the old term, pull the finger out.
There's been some interesting discussion on Demonland about the question of whether we're doing extra training loads at the moment. And I know that I didn't actually see it, but I read that Goody denied that, or he was asked directly about training loads, and he said we weren't. But frankly, I don't believe him. The more I think about it, the more I think that that there's every chance that we're putting in extra training loads at the moment, because we look like we're playing tired. Where the game on the weekend, for me, one of the defining things about it was that we seem to have lost our overlap run, and we weren't running from, we weren't creating any handball overlap and moving from the back half at all. Partly that was, I thought the Giants played a good game of footy, was well coached, but we're definitely looking fatigued. Now, I don't know what the reason for that is. I'm guessing it might be those extra training loads. I think that there's been, George, you've made some really interesting points about our time on ground percentages, and a lot of those younger players, they seem to have deliberately sort of got them through the season with 50, 60% game time, and the senior players up are in the 90 plus to sort of offset that. So, we've got a lot of young players, so any young players are going to struggle, deep into this season. This is the time they historically, young players start struggling. But, if you add extra loads on top of that, even with 50%, 60% game time, both the senior players who are having to carry that extra load and the younger players are going to feel it. And I just think that our game plan is so physically taxing, as we've talked about often, is that when that drops away for whatever reason, whether it's because we're doing extra loads or that we're just fatigued generally and struggling at this point of the season, we really come back to the competition. And, we'll talk about it a bit later, but, for me, it really exposes our weakness. And, the Achilles heel that I think we have is our poor kicking and particularly our forward entries, but, shots for goal came back to haunt us again. The clubs like the Cats and the Dogs and even the Lions, probably the Cats and the Dogs more so, they've got such great kicks in the team that when they do drop off and their intensity drops off, like all teams do, this is the period of time when it becomes a really hard thing to get through the season. You've got, I watched the Dogs North game, and they were just paddling. They're never going to lose that game, the Dogs, but they never could quite get away from them. But whenever they needed it, McRae hit a target, Bont hit a target. I forget that young fella off the half back line. Is it Bailey Smith? Is it no
Bailey Dale?
Bailey Dale.
Yeah, it's just a beautiful kick of the footy, and those players do enough to keep them moving. In the first quarter of the Geelong Essendon game, Geelong were all at sea. You know, they had just not brought their intensity, and Essendon had, and they could easily have, that game could have been over at quarter time, but they were kept in it through Smith kicked a beautiful pass, and I think it was Cameron kicked maybe it was the end of the first quarter, he kicked it from the boundary line, one step banana or around the corner from the boundary line, and, you know, Hawkins threaded a goal. You know, their best players stood up when needed, but, you know, and then they weren't out of that game, and Melbourne really get hurt. So I just think we're fatigued at the moment, and I really reckon there's a good chance that they're putting loads in now because, you know, now's not the time to be cherry ripe. They want to be cherry ripe and fully fit come finals time, and really beyond this point of the season, there is no further opportunity to put training loads into the players.
Go ahead.
Andy.
No, you go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to totally agree. If you were the coach coming into the bye, you've almost got a 3-week period over that bye from when you last play your game. You have the bye in the middle, and then your next game's a further week away. I think we had a 10-day break, in fact, to the next round. But yeah, if you're a coach, you would definitely use that opportunity to get that extra load into the players, because you're not going to before the end of the season. As Ben Man just said, you need them cherry ripe at the end of the season. This is the last opportunity. So, yeah, I don't think Mr. Goodwin has been totally honest with us on his interviews.
No, and it's a bit of Occam's razor in the sense that, you know, they're looking fatigued. This is 3-4 weeks in a row where we're comparatively, we're not running out games the way we were. You know, in the first 6 weeks, we were running on top of the ground and we were clearly fitter than the opposition. Now, we're not sure, you know, everyone levels out a bit, but you can't have such a strong base of fitness and it fall away. I mean, so it's either they've struggling with their fitness, which is, given where we are with injuries, that seems not that likely, or they're doing extra training loads, or there's something else going on. But I don't think it's mental. They look exhausted, but in all the last 3-4 games, they've looked exhausted and haven't been able to pull away, or, you know, they struggled to even lift in this quarter against the Giants, and that was really evident on the. Going to the game, it was great to get to a game. And so I had binoculars on the players quite a bit during the breaks and at different times, and they looked stuffed where they weren't in the first 6 to 7 weeks of the season. So, you know, I mean, what are the explanations for that? It could be the season. It could be the fact that they are struggling physically, and they've come back to the field in terms of the the fitness advantage that Burgess had given them. But, you know, you don't lose that overnight. So, and I mean, and I think I've heard that this is not uncommon for Burgess. He did a similar. He was known for doing it at Port, and he's apparently also known for using loading at Liverpool. So, you know, and I mean, I guess that the danger is people thinking, oh well, that's an excuse. What sort of excuse is that? It's not really an excuse. It's more looking for a reason rather than an excuse.
Yeah, and when a game's decided by 9 points, it's very little between the two teams, and we had come back to within 10 points halfway through the third quarter, and basically we stopped dead from that point on. In the first half of the season, that was our springboard to put the opposition away, and this time we couldn't. And more telling for me was the ease at which GWS scored their goals in that last quarter and a half. There wasn't the same pressure that was there, and I think Ben Man's exactly right. You take that pressure away, kicks aren't delivered as efficiently as they should have been, and the opposition get those small opportunities, and GWS's side is loaded with players of high talent. They don't need much opportunity, but we couldn't peg back a 10-point margin from halfway through that third quarter.
Yeah, and George, in your review of the game on Demonland, it was an excellent review, and you made a really good point, about our inability, about their the clearances being, obviously they weren't great. I think it was 10-6 or 12-6 for centre clearances. But as you pointed out, the key issue was, that number's not great, but the key issue is what they did with them. And they were really damaging from the clearances. And again, it goes to the fatigue because, when that defensive running and our intensity drops off, or every part of our game drops off. I thought we did remarkably well to keep them to the score that they got because, if you're not putting pressure on a player of the calibre of, what's his name is, the left footer.
Kelly.
If you're not putting pressure on a player of his kicking ability when he's releasing the ball, well, that he's going to carve you up. And that's what he did. He had, 35 plus possessions, but the problem, previous week was Parrish. Well, and Merritt, they weren't hurting us the way Kelly did, and a big part of that, and same with Whitfield, was we weren't putting enough pressure on them, and so not only weren't we eventually did bring a player up in the second half to the contest because we were getting smashed around the contest, and we were allowing those outside players to get unpressured kicks, and that was part of the reason we got cut up. We just couldn't stop them. But for me, that's a fatigue thing because, as we talked about, our model is that we have a player behind the ball, the extra behind the ball, back our mids to win those contests. Well, we weren't, and you stop losing them when you're tired. And the reason I brought up the kicking is because nothing exacerbates poor technique in footy, in kicking, same for golf, like fatigue. And so a player like Track, who I reckon has got a terrible kicking technique, he was horrible. His inside 50s were horrible. I heard a stat on the first crack, something like he's 47th in the league or something for inside 50, hitting targets inside 50. He's only hit 11 all season. And he's like top 5 or something in the number of inside 50s he's kicked. And, he just missed. They're as deflating as the missed shots, but obviously the missed shots are more obvious. So, the more tired they get, the more, those mistakes become apparent, the less they can spread. So I think whatever the reason is for it, they looked fatigued. They've been playing that way for the last 3 weeks, I reckon.
Before I just ask you a question about the fatigue, just on Petrarca and the kicking, I don't believe you can fix that. That can't be fixed now. These players
be improved, can't it? Though?
I think I don't know. I don't know. I don't even know if it can be improved. I think these guys have their style, what they've learned at the junior level, and I don't know if you can improve it in the heat of a game. You can maybe improve your set shot kicking for goal, which we're clearly not trying to do because still players are missing easy shots at goal, and I believe it was the same this week. But in the heat of a game, I don't know if you can change someone's style that much.
Well, Langdon's improved, and I reckon Jones has improved over his career. But as a general rule, I agree. The difference between Langdon and Petrarca is Petrarca has so many good looks. So he gets the ball in dangerous spots in the centre, and if he's kicking inside 50, and he missed 3 on the weekend that were just completely deflating, and one in the last quarter where I forget who he was kicking it to. It might have even been gone. Just missed him, and he missed harms. And so, someone like Langdon, I think he's improved because he's making better decisions, and he's now kicking within his limitations. Petrarca is never really going to kick within his limitations, is he? He's always going to be going for it, and it looks great when it comes off. His best kicks, I reckon, are those 50-metre ones where he kicks into space. He seems to be able to hit them. It's the low drilling ones that he's got a thing. But
he often miskicks them as well sometimes.
Yeah, his ball drops are shocking. He's got comparing him to, say, Bontempelli, they're worlds apart in terms of technique.
In terms of the fatigue issue, B-Man, you were begging them to around the bye to start resting players. It was a good time to do it, and we didn't. We've basically kept the same team in the whole time, barring some injuries here or there. We haven't had many changes. We haven't rested any of the younger players, or even given some of the top tier midfielders a break. is this going to come and bite us in the bum now? Can we still do it now? We might be able to rest some of the younger players, but yeah.
I mean, they've caught. I don't think you can now, because this is the point of season where you really need to, as much as possible, settle on your best 22, and then your changes are, a result of injury or tinkering or. But the one that jumps to mind of the missed opportunity is Pickett. He was really horrible on the weekend. His pressure was non-existent. What did he end up with, George? 4 disposals?
4 disposals.
And he looked a bit. Two players. He dropped away, and the other one is Harms. And I mean, Harms, he's sort of a halfway player, and if he hasn't got a job, he seems to try too much. And so is Pickett sometimes, where it's like, just do the basics now. This is time to go back to the basics and do them. But he looks like he could have well done with a rest at that mid-season stage. And I don't know whether you take him out now, you risk sort of knocking his confidence. And if he needs a rest, then they should rest him. But the other problem for the club, if I'm right and they have done the loading, is that they would not have wanted this 5-day game. This was the last thing that they would have wanted, because even with Ben Brown, their thinking, I'm sure, was to, as I said last week, to give him one more week, give him a good run in the VFL and bring him back for Port. Well, their thinking would have been bringing him back to Port on a Friday night game. It's ridiculous that we've got a 5-day break. And so I think that's probably thrown them. And so someone like Pickett, now he's got to come up after 5 days. Same with Jordan. He looks like he's tired as well. So,
but Pickett could get dropped. I mean, just based on his performance. Forget whether you want to rest him or not. Does he deserve to be in the team after the last few weeks?
The difficulty we face with all of these selections, we'll get to that a bit later on, is the fact that Casey, for the players who played at Casey, they're only coming off 4 days, effectively. So who do you bring in to replace a Pickett? Is a half-cooked Pickett as good as someone who's fully cooked after 4 days? It's hard to tell, but Bin Man's right. I don't think in the original planning we would have been a Friday or a Saturday game perhaps against Port, and now we're on Thursday. So it's completely thrown it out. And from what I understand, that they've rested 3 players who were at the Casey game, Brown being one of them, in anticipation of having players available for this Thursday night. So we've painted ourselves into a corner, or the AFL's managed to paint us into a corner as well. But we do have to. I think we've seriously got to look at some of these younger players about when's now the most opportune time. Just as equally, if we lose to Port this week, we don't want to start resting against teams like Hawthorn the following week after, because both games are still worth 4 points. It's no use resting players thinking that Hawthorn aren't going to bring their best, because they certainly took it up to Port last week and Port got out to a good break in the first half, but they stopped completely. Hawthorn kept on going. So we've got to be very careful that we don't do the same thing. We don't take too many players out who can provide something to us.
Well, yeah, that's exactly right. And I think it goes back a little bit to this sort of discussion of the fatigue, because our strength is our system. Defensively, it's working well. We've got probably the best back six in the AFL. So teams will continue to struggle with us, but I just think that our quality wise in terms of our kicking means that any team, if we don't bring that intensity, is a good chance of beating us if they match it. And certainly the Hawks are up and about in terms of their ability to put that sort of pressure on when they've shown that. I think that any game's a danger game. So now's not the time to be sort of resting players, unless, of course, they genuinely need it. But, it's a good question, Andy, is whether, Pickett deserves to keep his spot, because 4 possessions, if it was Sam Wiedemann, we'd be jumping up and down. And he's had, really, it's just 4 weeks in a row he's been quiet. Yeah,
I think they had him off the ground in all of the last quarter. might have only been on for a very short period of time, but the majority of the quarter, I'm pretty sure he was off the ground. So maybe he's had a rest this week.
Yeah, and that was funny because that's why I couldn't work out. It took me a little while to work out at the game why Hunt was up forward. But it was because he was essentially replacing Pickett, wasn't he?
Yeah, basically it was, yeah.
And there were no injury report there didn't seem to be. He wasn't injured at all. So
no. Although he did have bandaging on both legs, and I couldn't see whether it was his wrists or whether they were just wrist guards or sweat bands, but he had a bandage on each and every limb.
Yeah.
Sorry, I had myself on mute. You talk about not taking any games lightly, especially considering we do follow the Ds, and our losses this year have come to pretty much all bottom 8 teams. Obviously now GWS are back in the 8, but I wouldn't be taking Hawthorn or Gold Coast the week after lightly, considering Gold Coast what they did to Richmond.
Yeah, I think we'll be safe with Gold Coast. We're sending them up to Ballarat this week. So if Ballarat isn't freezing at this time of year, they won't know what hit them.
I just wish we were probably playing the Eagles this week, get them while they're down. But
it'd be nice.
You speak about the Eagles, Andy, and obviously, we'll talk about. I'll be interested to hear about George's cure for MFCSS, and it's a real thing. It's a real condition, and it's a bit like chronic fatigue all those years ago. People, it's all in the mind, but we all know it's real. But Melbourne's average losing margin is 9 points. Compare that to the Eagles. I mean, I watched that game. They just were woeful. They were never in that game right from the beginning. If that was a Demon performance against the Sydney Swans, Demon Lamb would have melted down. There would have been. It was as horrible. It was worse than their previous game they played down there when they got beaten by 100 points or something by Geelong earlier in the season.
Yes,
it reeked of a team that had no interest in playing that game, early, right from the beginning. And so, I think that a bit of balance in terms of sort of judging where Melbourne's at. It's easy to sort of panic, I think. We're not going as badly as West Coast, that's for sure.
And it was interesting even in that game, though, wasn't it, that I think Andrew Gaff wasn't playing, and he's probably their biggest pressure player. And when that pressure disappeared, the same as in our game, the rest of the side looked very, very ordinary. And it's not a one-man band by any stretch of the imagination, but they also looked very flat. People like Nat Nui did absolutely nothing in the middle.
The most overrated player in the league, I reckon.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that. But when you've got two of their mids, and they're really critical mids in terms of controlling the game, not putting in or not being able to put in, it really affected the whole side. And I noted the commentators afterwards were saying, is this the end of the Eagles? We've seen Hawthorn fall off a cliff. We've been talking about Geelong doing the same in years to come, but have the Eagles fallen off the cliff suddenly as well? So it'd be an interesting question over the next couple of weeks that needs to be answered.
Well, the 10 of their, on that first crack again, I was just watching before, there's 10 or 11 of their best 22 or 29 plus. So, and it sort of showed, I guess, so that, I think it's good to put that in balance. In terms of pressure, I read on Demon Land that, because I was at the game, but I think this was on the coverage of the thing, which I haven't watched on replay yet, is our pressure was as lowest at half-time as it had been all season. I think that's right. And Giants was up north of 200 now. Again, I'm not quite sure what all the numbers indicate, except for 200 plus is excellent. And, I think our pressure was just sort of poor to middling until really the beginning of the last quarter. And, the Giants are a good footy team. Like I said in last week when we were talking about, they're sort of a meat and potatoes team, but, they've also got the quality players Whitfield and Kelly. It's quite, I think it's remarkable really that Harms didn't go to one of them to try and sort of nullify them, because they were really hurting us in that, both with their quality.
Well, let's talk team selection in particular for last week. We chose not to go with Ben Brown. You said that they might have wanted to see how he goes for another week, but was it a mistake not to play him this week? I might ask, did we know we were going to be playing on Thursday off the 5-day break and the 4-day break from that when we picked the team?
I don't think we did.
No.
They didn't announce it to the next day.
Yeah, I think you're correct there.
So maybe the club might have got an indicator, but I don't think so. He only had 3 possessions or something, but from what I understand, barely played a minute after half time, or none. I don't think he played anything. Same with Melksham, played sort of minimal time. So that might be a bit of a tell.
Well, they would have known at that time when they were playing. They knew.
They knew then, but not. Election. Yeah. I mean, for me, it's a bit hard to say. Like I think they weren't wanting to see how he went as much as get another week of training into him, and of course, get a good game of footy into him if you can. So it was a real pity that obviously that part of the plan wasn't there. But I said last week, my thought was the plan was to give him that chance to sort of get everything right and come in for the Port game and stay in for the rest of the season. So I think he'll come in. Was it a mistake not playing him last week? It's a bit, I think that's an easy thing to say, would have been good. So often it was, you could basically hear at the ground people sort of, the ball would come in and you could hear them thinking almost, where's the full forward? It's a pity we don't have a Coleman medalist. Oh, that's right. We do have a Coleman medalist. He's in the Magoos. But, I think our pressure was so poor that, another player who isn't great forward pressure may not have helped much either. But, in hindsight, it would have been good to have him in the team. And, it's particularly how high up the ground Tom McDonald was playing. So, Tom McDonald was marking it on the wing and turning it around, and if he had himself to kick to, we might have kicked the winning score. But he was putting it on top of Fritchett's head, who was getting scratched. I was actually had a fairly good spot, but down on the half forward flank at the punt road end, and he was getting smashed in the contest. Fritch, like just completely smashed. But he's not a 6'4", 6'5" forward, is he?
No, it's. I think it was painfully obvious that we needed that extra target up forward because, firstly, I think there's 2 things that were wrong. The Jackson-Gawn moving forward plan, I think, has been an abject failure. Neither took a mark up forward and neither scored again this week. In the Essendon game the previous week, we had similar problems. I think I alluded to a number of times. I saw Langdon and Brayshaw bringing the ball down the wing, and they're looking for someone to kick to. And all we've got a series of 6'1" type players in the forward line. The very least Ben Brown is going to bring is his 200 centimetres. He's a target up there. We won't have people like Phil Davis sitting back and taking marks unattended, which is what happened. Now, that's the sort of defensive structure we won't run as well, but Davis was just having an absolute ball out there. If it came in and he was attending to Fritch or Spargo or ANB or Sparrow, it was an easy take for him each and every time. We were just missing that extra big target down there. And I talked about in my report at one stage, I think it was Sparrow had the ball on the wing. He was coming down. We're in the open. The only person inside the 50 was Max, who was about the 50-metre mark, and he was trying to run back towards the goal. He's not a full forward. He's not a leading target. So having the big lumbering ruckman in there, even having Jackson in there, they're doubling up. We're just robbing Peter to pay Paul. We just need that extra target. And Bin Man's right. If we had a second Tom McDonald, it would have been fine. Tom took 10 marks outside the 50, and nothing inside because he wasn't there. We just need something else there to create the target. And if they mark it, if a Brown or a Wiedemann, doesn't matter who it is there and takes a mark, that's a bonus. But we didn't have anyone to even bring the ball to ground in this game, and it's not surprising that people like Pickett and Spargo also had no effect. Fritsch's great work was done all off his marking ability, and thank goodness he was there.
So it's a selection mistake there. Thank you for answering.
Yeah, and funnily enough, because it was really evident at the ground, and at one point I yelled it out. I can't remember ever yelling this out at the footy, but I yelled out, "Where's the overlap?" Mm. And it just, there was no run off the halfback flank, so we were getting so little movement from there, and that's where where Lever or May marks, and generally then we're off to we're moving, we're those linking handballs, and there was just none of that. But what that actually did was sort of turn our game style, and a bit like the Giants do that. They don't run hard off there, into a sort of almost a traditional style where we ended up using the centre channel a lot more. And ironically, that lack of run off the halfback flank made the absence of a true leading forward even worse, because there was plenty of space to run straight up the centre, wasn't there, George?
Yeah.
Like there was channels that a good forward would have run into.
Yeah.
They weren't flooding back particularly. They got players back, but because we weren't, it wasn't one of those games where we were moving it really fast off the halfback flank and creating chaos ahead of the ball, where a player like Cozzy could come into it because it's hitting the ground. We were bringing it too slowly into our forward line. It was sort of turned into a one-on-one sort of contest, and that's where it's where someone like a Brown comes into his own. So ironically, the way the game looked it was exactly not how on a Melbourne terms, and it would have totally suited Brown because there was heaps of space to lead into. And as you say, one thing I'll say about Jackson is that he looks so much more a natural ruckman than forward. I totally agree, George. And he's got a bit of a technical flaw in his marking, I reckon. He tends to run under the ball quite a lot, but seemingly particularly up forward. Mm-hmm. Whether it's a positioning thing or I'm not quite sure. He does it less so up the ground, but I think that's partly because up the ground he's often running towards the ball, if that makes sense. He just doesn't. He doesn't use his body like a natural forward, and he's not kicking goals really either, is he? So on the first crack, they talk about one of the problems for not having a Ben Brown in, and it was a good example on the weekend, is that drags Max back and forward, forward and back, and he plays at both ends of the grounds. And he was, for the first 6 or 7 rounds, they showed some numbers that we were number one, the points for, I think, points scored by the opposition with per entry inside 50. We were number one, and in the last 5 rounds we've dropped to number 5. And Montagna was saying a big part of that was because Max is now being asked to play forward, whereas previously in the first 6 or 7 weeks he was doing most of his off. When he wasn't rucking, he was dropping back into the hole in the back line. So, I reckon, it was a mistake not to have Brown in. And I think Goodwin made an interesting comment in the presser where he sort of basically, I forget the exact words he said, but he said it'd be naive to think that it wouldn't have been helpful, I think, was something along those lines.
Mm.
We've discussed this before, but I think maybe we need to discuss it again, do you think we actually need a proper forward coach? We've got Greg Stafford, who's a ruckman and was a great ruckman, and I'm sure he's doing some great work with the two ruckmen. But I really think our forward structure is falling down. It's not working. We'll see what happens when Ben Brown comes in, but I really think we need the next, and I don't know if we can afford it with the soft caps and all that, but I think we need a bona fide forward coach, someone that's their bread and butter. That's what they played their career doing. They know it inside and out. Maybe we need to just change it all up. Thoughts?
Yeah, it's look, every club's probably in the same situation with the soft cap. Forward coaches are probably something that's expendable compared to the other areas of the ground. But I think it's the subject matter that we're working with is the problem, and we've just spoken about this. Ben Brown certainly knows how to play as a forward. Bailey Fritsch knows how to play as a forward. But Max Gawn and Jackson don't, and Tommy Mack does a great job, but he's moving up the ground. You've got to... it's a bit like the back six. You've got to have people who are there permanently, not people who are floating in and out during the game, filling a role here, plugging a hole, then moving into the ruck. You've got to have a more stable structure. Just look at what the Bulldogs have got, for example, with Josh Bruce. Now, Bruce has had fantastic form in the last 18 months at least because he's been doing what he does naturally, and then they've got Aaron Norton sitting alongside him doing the same sort of thing. But they're there every week. They don't expect English to play a forward role all the time. Yes, he floats down there nice every now and again.
And kicks goals, though.
And kicks goals. And that's what Max used to do. Just go down there temporarily, be a real damaging target, but we're putting too much focus on resting the ruckman up forward. It's a different scenario to what the Bulldogs are playing, for example. So, we've got a problem, but I think we've got to put the right sort of players in there in the first place.
One of the other features of the game that a WA Demon Boy in a chat room asked about, and Georgie had on the running sheet, was our slow starts. It was another slow start, really, and WA Demon Boy notes that the Dogs was the only one where we got out of the blocks, where 6 goals, 5 in that game. But, it feels a bit like we take that first 20 minutes of the game to feel out the opposition a bit, doesn't it? And, that seems to be it's obviously a pattern. What do you reckon that's about?
I honestly don't know. It has to be a mental thing. I mean, the fact that they can come back and have come back in games throughout the whole season up to this point, but we never seem to get off to a good start. I mean, even in this game, Toby Green had his first goal within the first 30, 40 seconds of the game.
From a horrible free kick, I might add.
Yeah, that's true, but. We just seem so flat for a start. I just don't know what it is. I can't pinpoint anything specifically. It's certainly within them because they do manage to get their act together eventually. But when you're already playing from behind, it's a lot harder to. I think we were 3 or 4 goals down at one stage in the second quarter.
Yeah,
it's a lot harder to come back when the total number of goals you kick for the game is 7.
Especially if fatigue is an issue and might be an issue going forward. So you're going to be able to chase down the opposition every week in, week out. You just can't sustain that, especially if they're already at a fatigued base. So,
yeah, and it'll be very important this coming week. Apparently, it's full capacity stadium at Port. You do not want to give them a sniff and their fans a sniff.
You want to come out like we did against the Bulldogs and take out the 19th man
exactly.
out of the equation. But
exactly. As we talked about in the mid-season review, they're a team that plays on emotion, aren't they? So,
I think we've talked about the forwards. You want to talk about the mids? How'd our clearances go this week, big man?
Well, I think as I noted, George's point in his review was spot on. Is the numbers were terrible, but it's not the numbers. It's what either we or the opposition do with them, and they hurt us. And a big part of that was that we just weren't pressuring the ball carrier. And I have to say that Viney was. He had a very poor game, and I know that we'll talk a bit about him. But he's, as I mentioned, he's a really important player for that pressure, but he just wasn't applying it. And so clearances weren't great, but the issue is not the raw numbers; it's what they did with them, and they hurt us pretty badly on they cleared the ball pretty easily. I don't think they actually got that many goals from them directly from clearances, but we certainly didn't get many.
I think Goodwin said they got 3.
Yeah, so, again, context is it's pretty important. 3 goals is not like a Bulldogs performance from clearance, is it? So, the numbers were out of whack, no doubt about it. I think that a mate of mine texted me afterwards to basically sort of question our midfield. There's sort of discussion about us being up there with midfield, but he's saying, you made the good point that, there's no way you could compare our midfield even at full strength to, say, the Dogs midfield. And even the Giants, they've got a very solid midfield. And when you've got, when Oliver and Petrarca aren't playing at their very best, it suddenly falls away a bit, particularly if Viney was in the sort of form that he was this week. Then, it looked decidedly thin, I thought, on the weekend. So, we really need those players to sort of be at a very high level every game. Otherwise, the midfield isn't nearly as competitive as, we'd hope.
Yeah, I had questions about the value of Harms, particularly this week, because he was playing the majority of the time in the midfield and around the clearances as that third midfielder. He was getting his possessions around the ground, but certainly in the centre bounces, he was all at sea. I couldn't see that he was tagging anyone, and then
he wasn't tagging, no.
And the question for me is, if he's not tagging someone in there, what's he doing in there?
And he's so frustrating at times in terms of. I was trying to think of the player he reminds me of, but this is going way back. Remember Rhino Richards?
Yeah.
He used to always try to break tackles, and it looked great when it came off. And so when it did come off, he'd get into space. He'd look like a world beater. Same with Harms. He just tries it. He just, when he's not got a job, which is tagging one of the best opposition players, it seems as if he misunderstands his ability somehow, or a bit like Frosty, or even T-Mac when he was playing as a defender, seems to sort of take too many risks, and then sort of it looks good when it comes off, but geez, he made some howlers, I thought, and often they were more about his trying to do too much with the ball, and rather than just the basics well.
Yeah.
I go ahead,
sorry,
Judge.
Andy.
No, you go.
I just thought he also set up a whole series of hospital hand passes in particular to people. He'd get a stat for a hand pass away, but he was putting people under so much pressure rather than doing this, like you said, the simple things. Just get the ball and get it out. Go for the easy option rather than trying to do too much. But I think that was the major reason why we were really suffering, was we had Petrarca and Oliver, who certainly held up their end of the bargain. I don't know that Harms did. When you've got Toronto and Ward and Kelly and Whitfield playing through the middle, you've got 4 really highly talented players, and we didn't have. And for me, that explains why they got the ease of movement out of the middle and around the packs in this particular game.
So, and combine that sort of differential in terms of, as you say, it's a strong midfield, but also not putting enough pressure on them. And, Viney, he was, it's Jordan, when he was at his best, Viney was out, was much better than Viney was in this game. So, you're right. We had Harms who played poorly and made some sort of errors that hurt us. You had Track and Oliver just going, but Track just missed too many targets, really. And you had Viney, who, I'd be curious to know, you haven't seen it, Andy, but what your view was. It defensively wasn't great, and I just wonder whether he's still carrying something. I had my binoculars on him at the halftime break. They came out and they had their obligatory, all-team huddle. And Max was talking to them, and it's total pet hate of mine. I've done a bit of basketball coaching, and my kids play sport. It's a pet hate of mine when the coach is addressing the players and you've got kids looking off into the distance. I just hate it. But that's exactly what he was doing at halftime. Max was talking. They were all hugged together. He was on the outside of that sort of circle, and I had my glasses on him, and he was sort of just staring off into the middle distance away from not looking at Max. He eventually turned around. And so then I kept my glasses on him afterwards for a while as they went off to their positions, broke for their positions. And he just looked a bit disgruntled, and players were coming up to him. He just didn't seem to have any energy, and he also was sort of flexing his leg a bit like he'd been. I know he went down pretty hard at one point, and there was a bit of talk about him pushing away a trainer on Demonland. But and I thought, well, maybe that's being a bit unfair on him. Like players can get, players take a different approach, I'm sure. But unfortunately, the sort of lack of interest is how he played in the second half. He definitely wasn't the dynamic player he is when he's at his best, and he just didn't give us that injection that you've talked about, George, when he's a sort of explosive player. There was none of that, was there?
No.
I mean, we were all in agreement that he comes straight back into the team, but was that a mistake? Should he have played some weeks in the twos? But I guess at the time the twos have just come back. But now that they are back, might he have been better suited to work his way into it after having missed a large chunk of the season?
I don't think that's a problem. The way that Burgess has been preparing the players when they've come back, they've usually been in pretty tip-top shape. I'm not a great fan of the phrase match fit. You're either fit or you're not fit. Match fit used to be something that was applicable 25 years, 30 years ago, when players used to train once a week and turn up for the game on Saturday, so they got as much fitness preparation on the Saturday as they did during the week. That doesn't happen these days. So I think if you're ready to go, you're ready to go, particularly given our injury list. It's not like we're bringing players back because we have to. So if you're ready to go, and I think if Viney was in that case, then he should have been available. But Binman might be right. If he's taken a bad hit in the game, then there's a good reason for him not performing up to his usual self. But I dare say that we'll find out in the next couple of days or so when the teams are announced who's in and who's out. I suspect Vandenberg is being looked at seriously to come back in, and he provides a similar sort of grunt to us. Yeah, that we probably need, but whether it's Viney goes out, we'll talk about that a little bit further down the track.
In a way, Viney's like a metaphor for the team because, if he's not playing at full, intense, run through walls, Jack Viney, and he's not playing at that level, he's an average kick. He doesn't get depth. He makes some unusual decisions, like he burnt track at one point, whether it maybe just didn't see him, but that's his sort of tunnel vision. So he's what he brings is that intensity. You take that away, it's a bit like the team. If you take our intensity away, well, suddenly we look average. And he's that sort of player. Without that full kamikaze approach to the game, he suddenly looks a bit average.
Just looking at the notes, George, you've written game time for Sparrow and Jordan. Can you elaborate?
Yeah, this week Jordan had 65%. Sparrow was down to 55% game time. We've spoken about whether the training loads are causing this, but they haven't actually had a lot of game time in the last couple of weeks as well. So it's interesting to be looking at how much time they're getting. It's difficult for us on the outside to judge whether they're protecting these kids because they're both very, very young and very new to the game, particularly since both are playing in the middle, or whether there's something else going on in terms of giving others greater game time. But certainly they seem to be making full use of the available time that they're getting, which is great. But maybe it's time that I don't know that we just don't know. Are they actually tired or are they just being prepared for greater things towards the end of the season? I just don't know, but we've just got to wait and see.
Well, I reckon, again, if you apply Occam's razor, the latter's more logical. And in fact, I think it gels with what you've been saying all season about that time on ground. I reckon it would make a hell of a lot of sense for a team where we're at with almost a third of our list under 23, or sorry, a third of our best 22, our starting 22 under 23, maybe a quarter, to get them through a full season. You can manage your loads on the track. You can also manage your loads in game time, can't you? So, they would have, these days, they'd have, the distance they travel and all of that stuff down to a fine art. So, I reckon, there's every chance with those younger players that they're managing their game time with a view to increasing them as the season goes on. Maybe someone like a Jordan, if he'd played 80, 90% to this stage, he might be, out on his legs, but you keep him at 50, 60%, and maybe they can, in the back, coming into finals, they can let him play 80, 90%, and suddenly you've got a player who's a gun, who's getting 80, 90% game time as opposed to 50, 60%. I reckon it's something that could well be a very it seems to be a pretty logical thing to do. So there's every chance that's what they're doing.
I've just had a look back the last couple of weeks, and both of them have been hovering around. Jordan the last 2 weeks has been around the 65-60. Sparrow the last 2 weeks has been, he actually played more this week than the week before. He is 55 this week and 50% the week before. And then going back to the Collingwood game, Jordan was only 57 and Sparrow was 66. So they've both been sort of hovering around that sort of 50 to 65% mark. They're obviously, that's obviously the goal with them, and I'm sure if I went back further, would see the same pattern for them. So there's obviously a reason they're being managed through the year. I think the great thing about Jordan is even with 50 to 60% game time, he's getting 23 possessions every week with that game time. So I think that's a good thing for when he does play 80, 90%.
And just on a similar, maybe slightly tangential thought, during the game I was wondering a little bit about that game time thing, but I was wondering with the introducing something new into the game plan that we haven't done, but there's been some shifts like where we're much more deliberate in our ball movement. And I think that's to do with, potentially fatigue. We were holding the ball much longer. But I wonder whether, Goody, ever since he's come to the club, has been talking about the finals being a second season, so that there's season one is a home and away. You get there, finals is a whole new season. That's sort of an American NFL sort of thinking, and that every year he's introduced something, and it would seem to me that there's a chance that he will introduce something that they're working on, but they bring in at the end of the season, because I've heard many times during different seasons that the game changes 2 or 3 times in the season. So, there's a bit of working out what other teams are doing and then sort of adapting. And it occurred to me that there's a chance that we'll introduce something at the back end of the season. And why I relate it to the game time, because suddenly if you've got someone like Jordan who's moves from 50% game time to 80 to 90% game time, that provides you different options in what you can do. And so maybe that they'll look to introduce a sort of tactical innovation that they've been working on through the season and don't want to show their cards at this point of the year, and do so in the back end towards finals.
I saw a few things during the week. Didn't delve too much into it, but just the headline sort of grabbed me. And I don't know if it's just a bit of clickbait, but have we been worked out by opposition teams? Are they working? We're obviously being the top team on the ladder. Teams we're becoming the hunted, and so teams are putting in more work on us, and how we were winning. Are they now negating some of those things? Look, my thoughts on our wins against the Bulldogs and Brisbane were that perhaps they didn't put as much time into us as, say, GWS and even maybe Essendon last week and Collingwood had put into us. And they were just trying to play their A games to beat us. But we were able to have the better of them in those games. But now the teams might be putting more time into us. Is it going to be harder for us to win if we don't sort of adapt? And neither of you can take that.
Well, I mean, of course there's always going to be adaptations, isn't there? I thought Brisbane did actually put some work into us. They definitely tagged Salem for one, and they definitely try to avoid dump kicking into to Lever and to May. So absolutely, oppositions will do that. But I think that what's interesting in that is that if you've worked out a team, well, then you score heavily against them, don't you? Who's scored against us? No. I mean, the problem for us is that, we haven't been scoring enough. So, I mean, what did they score on the weekend? Those
69 goals.
Yeah,
9 goals. I mean, that's 9 goals isn't, so... I mean, so you could argue, well, they're taking away our ability to score. But as we've talked about the last 2 weeks, if we kick straight, we wouldn't have been beaten this season.
Yeah, I think we're taking away our ability to score in the way we're kicking into the forward line as well.
Well, Essendon didn't. Essendon didn't take away ability to score. We took our own ability away.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Because we couldn't hit the bloody target.
Yeah.
This game did, but we were so flat in this game, and even still, we had a chance to win it. If Hunt had just kicked it instead of 3 times not knowing, going for the team thing, if we'd had a bit of luck with the umpires in that last quarter, if Fritsch hadn't have missed a shot from 20 metres after that mark, we could have easily won that game. So, of course, teams are going they've got a full body of work to look at us, and they know what we're going to do. And of course, they'll look to work on mitigating our strengths just as we will with them. But they've worked out West Coast, haven't they? They're scoring 120 points against them.
And the thing is, our big defensive structures are obvious to the other teams, and they still can't do anything about it. They can't stop May and Lever. You have to completely change the way that they go into the forward line to avoid them, and I think that upsets the opposition's attack modes more than anything else. But as Binman said, our problem's the forward line, not kicking enough goals. It's not the defence. It's not being worked out. Our mids are okay, although there's a couple of questions that we've raised tonight about them, but yeah, our forward line is the problem at the moment. We can't kick 7 goals on what was a perfectly good day and expect to win a game, especially when we kick, 7-13, as Ben Man said. We had plenty of opportunities to kick that. There was another one that Rivers missed, was a snap that completely just went up in the air. There was the Fritsch... the Fritsch kick around the body from 10 metres out effectively that missed. T-Mac hit the post, I think, first in the first quarter. There were certainly plenty of opportunities for us just to kick straight, but straight kicking comes back to practice, but also if people are fatigued, that's when the straight kicking gets most affected. And again, in that last quarter, there just wasn't the run and the vibrancy, particularly in that forward line, that was needed. Hunt was running down the ground and nobody was moving for him.
No.
He was looking for someone to kick it to.
Yeah.
He should have kicked it at the goal because there was none of the players were doing anything. But it's because of either this fatigue factor that they've got or the lack of structure that the forward line's got. We just have to kick goals.
And I mean, one thing I wonder whether they're putting a bit of time into keeping it away from Langdon. He's not had the since he came back from that injury, he's not been quite as influential. They're not working us out in terms of our forward line. It's not as if their opposition defensive systems have suddenly unlocked our ability. Like West Coast is such a great scoring team when they're on with all of their bigs. You could argue other teams have found a way to stop that. For instance, as George said, we've had our chances. It's our fault that we're not scoring, not the opposition's fault. I shouldn't. I don't want to sound critical of Hunt actually, because I'm not critical at all for him for those efforts. I wish he had have kicked them, but it's sort of like that's one of you can't knock a fella for playing team football when the whole season's been built on team football, can you? And he was the only one showing any run in that last quarter. Like as you say, George, he was running down, screaming out for Brown. That was one of the more obvious ones where he was just looking for a forward and knew how to double back and lead into space. Someone like Kennedy, if we'd had a Kennedy in the team, or perhaps a Ben Brown, he would have. That's exactly what have done. Instead of he would have run to the goal square, double back, and got an easy kick from Hunt, and that's what Hunt was looking for. Mind you, he was like we were. Had a bad run with the umpires, I thought. We had more free kicks, I think, on the day. But that last one that Hunt got pinged for was right in front of me, and he handballed that 100% handballed it. It was like that Margetts was sort of totally focused on not allowing the pro-Melbourne crowd to influence him, and he went the other way. And I thought the umpiring, there were some weird decisions. Fritsch had a mark, it wasn't paid. It's one of those ones that 9 times out of 10 that's paid, 99 times out of 100, where it looks like it's not clear if other people have got it. As it turned out, the replay showed he was the only one who touched it. That was a really critical one. The other one, D Future asked me about it on the to ask you guys what you thought about this one, was they umpiring about, well, two things. Is they were seemingly giving them absolute oodles of time after a mark before they called play on. It happened multiple times where we were hurried up after 2, 3, 4, 5 seconds. It was really noticeable. Like the fans were starting to scream at one point, play on, play on. And then the other one was that they seemed to completely stop paying infringing the protected zone. It happened at least twice where we should have got a 50 metres. One would have put us on the goal square. I think it was Tom McDonald. There was another free kick that wasn't paid where it should have been down the ground where Track got pushed in the back by Mumford as he kicked the ball. It's a free kick every day of the week, not paid, and that would have been down the ground in the goal square as well. So, I thought we had a pretty bad run with the injuries. With the umpires.
There's certainly been a change. It wasn't just in our game. The umpires are simply not paying any frees for the infringements of the 5 metre arc anymore. Last season it was endemic. It's just not happening at all. The other interpretation that's changed is the deliberate out of bounds or the lack of intent. I think the AFL have introduced the same rule as applies in the Women's League, the AFLW, that if you kick it or handball it out between the 50-metre arcs, it's considered to be it's a free kick to the opposition. I think we've got a rule change without getting a rule change in this because there are across all the games there are just simply ridiculous calls being made. Players under pressure, miss kicks that are going out, but the fact that they go out between the two arcs causes a free kick, and if you do the same thing inside the 50, it's always a throw-in.
And the other big change, it frustrates fans every season, but how you start the season with one set of interpretations, and by round 16, 17, it's completely, different. And a really obvious one is the stand the mark rule. They brought it in for a specific reason. Now they wander around like Brown's cows. It's like, they stand wherever they want. They ignore the umpire when they say stand. It's just a complete mess. And that protected zone one, they were red hot on that at the beginning of the season. And there was one where 2 players wandered through. I'm pretty sure it was T-Mac, had it up around the 60 metres marks. 2 of their players were in the protected zone. Again, it was right in front of me, and it was, at the beginning of the season, pay it. Round 16, stop paying it. I mean, it's just ridiculous. But the other one that's completely changed, like from last year, is holding the ball. It's just not paid anymore. Mm. And then occasionally it will get paid, and it's like it's paid for in weird situations where it's like that it's rewarding some really good rundown where sometimes it's paid where they actually haven't had time to release it, but it's rewarding the effort of the tackle for some reason. It's just that's a dog's breakfast as well.
You won't get any argument from me. I've got a mate in the US who's really in the last couple of years watched a lot of starting to get into AFL. Watches a lot. Got the Watch AFL thing. Watches not just Melbourne games but other games, and he often says to me, I just don't understand how the game is adjudicated. It is different from week to week. And this is without the noise of reading it online about or anything. This is just him. He just cannot grasp. He understands the rules, but just the interpretation of the rules, he just does not get and doesn't understand how it's different from week to week, game to game. And some weeks it's, as we know, that's the free kick of the week, or that's what they're paying this week, and it's really frustrating. And I don't know how they fix it. Maybe with Steve Hocking vacating the role, they might get someone in who fixes it all up. But I don't know. We'll see.
Well, I reckon. I mean, the biggest thing we could talk all night about the umpire. Is he American? That fella?
Yes, he is American.
So no doubt when he says that to you,
and
you
a sport
say,
lover.
I've got no idea either.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I reckon the biggest indictment on umpiring is, I don't want to criticise the umpires, the biggest indictment on the AFL is come finals time, prelim time, you don't notice the umpires. And they do a great job, and there's very few really controversial decisions in grand finals. I can count on, two hands over the years. I mean, they still talk about the Harms one, or these, not Harms, what's his name, was it Harms? The guy, when the ball was out of bounds. Yeah, all these years. I mean, there's not that many controversial free kicks because the best umpires umpire. That's how every game of footy should be.
Well, let's hope we're in the preliminary final to find out. Defence, obviously, still working pretty well. Hibberd versus Green. What did you boys think of that matchup, and did it work? Maybe start with you, George.
All right. I think the defence held up really, really well. Again, the fact that GWS could only kick 9 goals, that's normally enough to get you over the line in terms of winning the game, except that we couldn't do anything at the other end. Hibberd versus Green. Green got 3 goals. Only one of the first goal he got was because, I can't remember who it was, kicked the ball into one of their teammates, and it landed in Green's lap, and he kicked the goal off it. The second one was a dodgy umpiring decision where Green dropped his knees as Oliver was tackling him.
I thought it was Hibberd, but it was Oliver, you're right.
Yeah, and the third one was just simply a Toby Green brilliant mark one-on-one with Hibberd. But that was all he did for the whole game. Those 3 goals, which were all before half-time. After that, Hibberd had shut him down, so I think it was certainly the right matchup for us. He did his job, and apart from a few lucky opportunities that Green took full advantage of, he would have finished up with 1 goal for the game. That would have been a winning result for us if that had been the case. But the rest of the back line's holding up very, very well. Everyone's doing their job. No complaints whatsoever about there. Lever and May got leather poisoning again, doing what they do down there. Salem was brilliant in bringing the ball out again, coming back to his best. Hunt was moved up forward in the last quarter to try and give us some drive, but he was still doing his job. Prior to that, I don't think we'll see any changes down the back half because we don't need to.
I agree with all of that, except I don't reckon Rivers had his best game, and he's another player who's looking a bit tired, I reckon. Did you mention his time on ground before when you were going through those percentages, Andy?
I'll grab it back up while you're talking.
Yeah, he just looked he's looking a bit sort of frayed around the edges. And, yeah, I mean, Petty made a couple of mistakes, but again, I thought the defence was great. That it was interesting, as you say, George, that Green kicked 3 to half-time. I think they only had 5 goals at half-time, didn't they? So he kicked 3 of their 5 goals, and there was no sense that, Goody would move him off him. So I think, they were happy with that matchup. He got bugger all possessions, apart from then. But that mark he took against Hibberd, you're not going to knock Hibberd for that. He is just, as I said last week, he's an out-and-out star. I'd love him at Melbourne Footy Club. And, you put the ball in the air to his advantage, he wins that contest just about against any player in the AFL. And goes back and kicks it. That's the difference, isn't it? He goes back and kicks that from 45 metres, takes his opportunities. In fact, did he kick any points, George? I haven't looked at that.
Can check offhand.
Limited opportunities, but kicks 3 goals out of 9. Kicks a third of their goals with limited opportunities.
Three goals and no points.
Yeah, right. So 3 straight, all from distance, all from 30, 40 metres. That's the difference. And then Kelly kicked one from a beautiful kick.
It was outside 50.
Outside 50. There's the game.
And Whitfield did the same.
Whitfield did the same. That's the game of footy. And that's why I think that, it's easy to to panic about the loss. But, you reverse and we get 2 of them or they miss 2 of them and we win that game. But, that's why I've always wanted Kelly in the footy at Melbourne. He's just such a beautiful player, and Whitfield, and Green obviously, but they're good players. The best kicks take their chances when they come.
You say you want Kelly. Let's cast our mind back. I don't know if it was 2014. What would you have done in hindsight? I believe, what did we get? Salem and Wiedemann?
And Hunt was in that mix too, not Wiedemann. Wiedemann wasn't in the... It was Hunt and Wiedemann. Hunt and Salem.
No, but didn't we... I thought we had pick... What do we have in that? Didn't Wiedemann go in that draft as well?
I don't think he was. It was Hunt and we traded up and we got Salem and Hunt for the pick that we would have... That we gave to them, didn't we? Didn't we swap our pick 2 for their...
I thought pick 9 was involved, the Wiedemann thing, but I could be wrong.
Well, if he was involved, then arguably that changes the dynamic their way. Look, I mean, for a long time I thought that we made a mistake. Salem's been so brilliant, it's hard to think that now. So I reckon, I'll probably give that one to the coaches. That said,
you're right. Sorry. The D's traded pick 2 to the Giants to land Dom Tyson, pick 9, which was Salem, and pick 57, Jaden Hunt.
Yeah. Well, he had a couple of quiet years, Kelly, but he's on the market at the end of this season. We won't get him because we'll be priced out of the bet. He's a super player. So, but Salem's coming good. So, let's look forward. That might just pick up the MFCSS. They're still thinking about that. What was your cure for Andy, George?
Oh, I did extensive research on Google, and what I've discovered is I was looking up incurable diseases, which I think this qualifies. Do you think so, Andy?
Well, I've always said a temporary cure is a premiership, but then come pre-season the next year, it's back in full swing.
So it's definitely incurable from the sounds of things. So
there's a vaccine, the premiership, and you need a booster every year, so unless you can keep
a prelim minimum.
There was a great definition of what an incurable disease is. It's disorders of both infectious and non-infectious, neoplastic, autoimmune, metabolic, and genetic in nature. So what I've concluded from that, since it's genetic in nature, you actually caught this from Whispering Jack.
Yeah, well, I'm sure he's,
So all we're going to blame Jack for for passing it on to you. What I need to know though is, have you passed it on to your kids?
Well, they're really not so interested in football, so I think. I think they're cured just by that.
You sure it's not infectious? Because it seems to be spreading. I've been trying to sort of keep away from it, but it's. I had my doubts even on the weekend.
I understand that the 9 points and all of our losses this year haven't been big losses. It worries me that of who we lost to, that we can't. What worries me is that we haven't been able to put teams away, but we've been doing enough to beat teams. All right, fair enough. I'm worried about going forward. I'm bloody worried this week. I think this week might be the week we get absolutely pantsed, and I don't know if we can win this. It might be another one of those games luckily the old president's not in, because he might be making comments again after this week. I'm worried the next 2 weeks after, we've got games we now have to win against lower teams, the Hawthorn, Gold Coast. That worries me now. We've got
to get the vaccine.
We do.
There's no other. Look, we're not. It's like Australia. We're going nowhere until we get a vaccine.
I'm worried about. I'm worried that we're playing West Coast, and when they'll get their house in order,
play them into form.
Yeah, we'll play them into form. I wanted to play them this week. Worried about the Geelong game, Bulldogs. I'm already worried about going out in straight sets finals. I don't even think we're going to make top 4 at the moment, so we could be out in the first week. Anyway,
as I said, I went to the game, so I couldn't get a ticket to the SN game. Couldn't believe it, and so it's the first game I've seen live since. Was it Sydney? I think the last one before that. Not sitting at the top of the Ponsford because, of course, that wasn't open. I was down on what's the stand where the MCC is?
The Olympic stand?
The Olympic stand. I was down there on the half-forward pocket. I had a seat surrounded by people, so I went down into this spot where I was all by myself in a big empty...
Where were you, in the old red seats or the old blue seats?
Blue seats. I was down in the pocket, down in the road seats. Pocket on the right. And Jesus, the Melbourne fans, some of them are going ballistic at the D's players. I'm back at the footy where we've won 12 games, and the vitriol at some of our players, I think, good Lord, doesn't matter what club you barrack for, there's some whackers out there.
Oh, yeah. This week, is it? No, we're playing. We're playing away. Are you? That was my question, B-Man. Can you get to South Australia? That was your plan.
I was planning on going, and I'd taken leave this Friday on the assumption that it would be Friday night because it's game of the round, and I can't do it to Thursday night, so I've canned that idea. And now it's full 100%, so it'll be packed. I would have been able to get a ticket, presumably. There's a Melbourne members allocation, one assumes, and so I can't take Thursday off, so it's canned it for me. I don't understand why we have to play the Thursday night, why this game couldn't be the Friday night.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't even know why they're playing Essendon Friday night. Are they rewarding Essendon? Because Essendon, 12th versus 15th isn't that appetising, particularly when you've got the Bulldogs Sydney playing on Sunday 3:20. That would be, considering the form of both teams, put that on Friday night.
Well, I did wonder whether, historically, Friday night's the big one for, it's the biggest game of the round, isn't it? But I wonder whether Channel 7 wanted a bigger game on the Thursday night. And I know from last season they had a fair bit of sway in that because I guess they're tipping a fair bit of money in. I guess tipping a fair bit of money in gets you some sway. But I wonder whether for them Thursday night maybe is potentially more lucrative.
Yeah, possibly. It's the first game of footy for the week, so it's Thursday's the new Friday.
And you're going to get a full crowd in Port Adelaide, so the AFL wouldn't care about that aspect. You're going to get probably a close to sellout, you'd expect.
That's not going to the fact that it's live on TV is not going to affect the crowd.
Not in Adelaide, no. Whereas that's often what's spoken about as saying, well, Thursday night in Melbourne, you won't get a full crowd because it's a school night or whatever. So I think it's holidays over there as well. Maybe Friday night's not the marquee if there's a Thursday night game that's a big one. So potentially Channel 7 wanted the best game for the Thursday night. It's clearly the most important game of the round. Although Swans Dogs has got a lot of importance attached to it too. Go Swannies, huh?
Yeah, well, we've got to win. That's a given. If we want to take back that top spot, but top 4 is now very important. Let's talk about this.
This is a big game because, as we talked about, I don't rate Port, but they are 4th.
It's an 8-point game, as they say.
It's a classic 8-point game, and this could be one of the ones, if they get on a run, where, it might end up being that we don't want to play Port first week in Adelaide. That's 100% sure.
No way.
We're not going to be playing West Coast, so, we don't want to be playing Brisbane in Brisbane for that matter. So top two's critical, but, even if we finish third or fourth, if we can keep Port out of finishing out of the top four, well, we won't be playing them then.
Port have St Kilda after us at Marvel. They've got Collingwood at Adelaide Oval, which they should win. They've got GWS in Canberra. So that's not necessarily a win. They've got the showdown against Adelaide. Carlton in Adelaide.
Jeez, that's a pretty good run, isn't it?
Yeah, they got a good run, and then Bulldogs at Marvel in the last round. So they got a couple of games which aren't, straight out wins, but
including this one,
including this. So we need that 8-point game, and then
And the good thing is, I think if there's one game that's going to get us inspired, is playing against a decent team. Right off from the start, the pressure will be on, particularly in the midfield. Wines has been in fantastic form. The fortunate thing for us is that he's a horrible kick. I think him and Jack Viney probably spent too much time together, but he certainly is able to get the ball. I think he had 39 possessions last week, or something ridiculous, or 40 possessions. He had 29 to half time. It was just incredible. He was in everything. Surprisingly, Boak was a bit quiet. I think the old legs might have been a little bit slow this week.
He's injured, I think.
No, he was certainly playing, but he wasn't his normal.
No, I think he got injured in the match.
Did he?
Yeah,
Right.
I think so. Didn't he do his? I think he's out.
I'm just pulling up the old injury list, but that doesn't always tell us what the story is.
Robbie Gray's out, so that's a positive.
That, yeah.
If we can hold Dixon's he only kicked 3 goals, I think, against Hawthorn, and it's just his strength, but I think we've got May to be able to cover him beautifully. The other one that people really forget about is, what do we do about Aliir? He has been in fantastic form. If we let him loose at the half-back line...
Don't kick it down his throat.
Do not kick it anywhere near Aliir, but that's going to be our problem, which is another reason why we need a second tall forward, just to at least create the contest. You can't afford for him to be having a free rein on that half-back line, because that's where their drive comes out of. But I think it's going to be a ripping game. They've only got the one ruckman in Lysette. Dixon is the backup ruck for there, so there's an opportunity for us to take advantage of that. I still have no time for Ken Hingley as a coach. In the game against Hawthorn, like I said, Hawthorn kicked the first goal, then Port kicked the next 9, because Port were just attacking, moving the ball quickly, being free flowing, and all of a sudden after half time they just stopped. They went back to chip and kick all around the ground. It was almost like they were trying to defend a 10-goal lead, or whatever it was at that stage. And Hawthorn just worked themselves back into the game and kicked the next 5. Why that change of approach to the way they were winning the game was simply beyond me. But it's going to be an interesting contest, because ultimately it's second versus fourth, and both teams are well placed to be contenders in the final. Both teams have got aspirations. So Port are trying desperately to get into that top 4 position, and we're trying to hold on to second. So, this is a real 8-point game for everybody.
Absolutely. Cracking game. And I mean, apart from the fact that I can't go, and I've been thinking about, I've been looking forward to this match for months, wanting to go to it. It's great that we don't have to wait too long for the game. What that does to the sort of my theory around loads is interesting, because presumably they will have done no training pretty much this week. So it was super light work. Even if I guess it's sort of the one day, but they will have. They're thinking if there was loads, if they were doing extra loads, it will have come to an end. The impact, hopefully, if it was impacting them still on the Saturday, is it still going to be impacting on the Thursday 4 or 5 days later? I don't know. Hopefully not, obviously. but they won't have done almost no training you'd expect in terms of aerobic stuff. And one assumes then if that, let's say I'm right and they have done some extra loads, then their strategy would have all been based around this game, being as fresh as possible for this game. So let's assume that they're fresh for this game and they are running on top of the ground. So we give ourselves the best chance of winning. We match up really well against Port. And I think that, it's interesting, George, you say that, they were chipping around. They did that against Geelong, and it was so strange that they did that because, they needed to keep the ball moving. That's when they're most dangerous, but that plays into our hands. If the opposition are playing fast and we're covering the defense, we're covering defensively, we're not allowing them to get through the centre corridor like we did with the Crows. The quicker they go, the better for us. That's when, Lions lost control of that game against us when we forced them to go quick. If they go quick, it just bounces back from our defence. As quick as it goes in, the quicker it goes back out down the other end. So it really suit us a quick game, and sort of not the sort of contested sort of maul that we against the Giants. So, and I think that defensively, they've got struggles. I guess that we've got to expose that. So hopefully they'll bring Brown back in. So we won't be stretching their average defensive. We're only scoring 8-9 goals ourselves. So it's super important we get some overlap and run going. And I think the way they like to play will help us with that because that'll get us going. They are so structured up around Dixon that, Andy talked a few weeks ago in the mid-season review when, are we too predictable? Well, they could not be more predictable the way they look for Charlie Dixon. So, it'll be interesting to see who plays on him. You reckon May would be the obvious one. He's the only one strong enough probably to go one-on-one with him. I think that our defensive system, but in particular our defensive back six, suits their forward line really well. It does promise to be a fantastic game. I think we've got the sort of antidote to the way they play, and particularly, that's assuming we bring our full intense and our high pressure. But as you say, George, one of the things about being at the game actually on Saturday was a bit weird was how when they scored, how there was no sound. And when we were up and about, of course, there was sound, but, they were going into a cauldron on Thursday night. There'll be plenty of energy there, and hopefully the D's will feed off that and be on right from the get-go.
Who plays on Rosie? Do you put someone on him?
It sounds like it's something you put a bloody cream on, isn't it, a Rosie? Do we have a cream in our team? We could put cream on him, but we don't have a cream. Hibbard? Yeah. Hibbard could be on that. It was Farrell who got injured for them.
Yeah. I was just going to say Boak is not on the injury list, and I'm looking at their injury update from their website, and no, he's not there. And
it's Farrell, and it's a bit of a loss for him because he's an excellent kick for a long kick. I don't know who plays on Rosie. What do you reckon, George?
I think we just play the team defence. We don't, unless you've got a specific target like we had with Green last week. That's the exception rather than the rule. That Georgiades is just as likely to produce something. Like I think the last time we played him, he kicked 5 goals. But you depend on your team defence covering all of these players. The Rosie will get picked up in the team defensive structure by someone like a Salem or a Hunt as a general rule. But I don't think we need to start assigning players to one in particular. Dixon is the target. You're absolutely right, Ben Man. Their whole structure is about kick it to Charlie, and Charlie will bring it to ground. And it was always the Rosie, the Butters, the Georgiades, who were the ones who was the Robbie Grays who were picking up all the crumbs. But it always starts out with Charlie Dixon.
Yeah. And one thing that it's easy to just without talk about the system, the defensive, all of that stuff is all true, but the back six now, they're so comfortable when the ball hits the ground. So if we could spoil it, you back our back six in against almost any forward line in terms of our ability, even though, as I've said before, a our weaknesses is that small defender, and we've been the medium and smalls from opposition score a lot of their goals, but they don't really have, particularly with what's his name? What's the player out with the knee injury? Robbie Gray. With him out, he's exactly the sort of player who troubles us big time. We bring if we can cut, Lever comes across, Petty comes across, and May takes Dixon. If we can bring that ball to ground, back our back six to work our way out, get the ball and work our way out of defence. Really, for me, our chances will be based on how well we're running and how well we can get that ball moving quickly up the ground. And I reckon selection is going to be really interesting. And I agree, George. I reckon there's every chance that Vandenberg will come in. Goodwin loves him. I reckon Melksham will come in, and I reckon Brown will come in. That three changes, maybe that's too many. I don't know. Maybe
who comes out?
Say again.
Who comes out?
Well, I reckon Sparrow might come out this week. I think he's without too much of a knock on me. He wasn't huge. Harms was poor, so I wouldn't break my heart to see him come out.
2 weeks ago, we bought Viney in and didn't obviously a mid, but we didn't take any mids out. We took Melksham out at that stage, so Melcham's coming back. So I think we will lose one of the mids. The other interesting one I'd like to throw up was whether Jackson stays there, because Port have only got Lysette as the ruck. Charlie Dixon was doing their backup ruck role. So do we actually need the two rucks playing, particularly if we bring a Ben Brown in?
No, they're not going to drop Jackson though. There's no chance.
They're more likely not to bring in Ben Brown because of that reason. They're going to keep him in. I'll be disappointed if Ben Brown doesn't get a chance. I think.
Absolutely. I think Brown is an absolute certainty this week. But the difficulty is going to be about who they drop, particularly as Ben Man said, they've been pushing Vandenberg, and I think he'll be a great positive to bring into the side. But somebody's going to miss out. I suspect Sparrow's probably at the top of the list. And again, it's about the loading on these younger ones might become critical, but this might be a rest period for him that's almost enforced rather than desired.
Yeah, and maybe Cozzy. So maybe Cozzy comes out and Sparrow stays in, and Sparrow plays as the pressure forward. He played that role in the first few games, didn't he? So, if he's struggling, then if they're not 100% confident he's fit and up to it, then he should come out. So, I think that we shouldn't be afraid to drop him if they think that he's not going to give what he needs. As you say, George, it's going to be big crowd, big game, 8 points. You've got to pick players who are right on. Maybe that's why, Vandenberg would be a tough game to bring him back in. I can see him coming in, but I reckon Melksham is almost a lock because, as much as I've criticised his pressure, in that game, the last V4 game that was televised, his pressure was better, and we sorely lack his ability to hit a target inside 50. So I saw one of the stats a week or so ago, he's still up in our top 5 in terms of score involvements.
And from the Casey game this week, I think it was Vandenberg, Melksham and Brown were all rested effectively in the second half. So I think we're certain to see those three certainly at the top of the list this week. And and maybe Vandenberg as injury sub. Yeah, he'd be a great player to come off. If you had an injury and you feed him meat until he's ready to go, and then release him into the core. Work for T-Mac.
Yeah, maybe not from just eating through 2.5 quarters of footy, but.
All right, boys. Anything else before we wrap it up? What else has been happening down at Demonland?
Nothing else that I'm aware of. So, I think that's about all.
Well, the teams will be out tomorrow night, won't they?
Yeah, that's correct.
So we'll know well and truly by this time tomorrow night who's playing, and you'd know more than or George. The captain's run is when tomorrow.
I don't know. They had a very light session on Monday apparently, but from one of the Demonlanders who was there, Vandenberg, Melcham, and Ben Brown weren't at that. Although there's been vision contradictory to that, I think, on one of the television reports. But I suspect Ben Brown will be in. They had a small piece on Channel 9 tonight with Viney, and he was pumping up Ben Brown, so I think he's almost a certainty.
Well, there's no rain predicted for Thursday night, so that's a good thing.
Good. And AF in the chat room is saying there's rumours that Boak won't get up, and my Pollyanna is the opposite to the MFCSS, is that I choose to believe that rumour. So Boak isn't going to be playing. Robbie Gray's out. They've got nothing.
All right. Well, let's hope so. We have to take any injuries to get over the line. I'll take it. Don't usually like to do that.
I'll leave you with a question for both of you. I'm on top of a number of footy tipping down at my golf club. I'm on top of 100 of us, so I'm flying in footy tipping. Not coincidentally, Melbourne are flying as well. So, but do I tip Melbourne this week?
No. Well, you're asking the wrong person.
George?
I'll go and ask my wife. She's on top of our footy tipping competition.
Okay.
and the good thing is she has no interest whatsoever in football.
Well,
right.
I'm leading my footy tipping competition that I have with my mates, and I would be absolutely flying. I'd be multiple picks ahead if I had more confidence in my own team. And as well, the 3 times I've picked them, well, I've picked them more than 3 times, but 3 of the times I've picked them this year, we've lost. So,
right, so you're not picking us.
Well,
you didn't even have time to think about that question before you said no.
When I'm picking them, when I'm picking us, we don't win. When I don't pick us, we do win. So I'm happy not to pick.
Can you not pick us then?
Yeah, well, that's what I'm going to do. Look, for me, if I don't pick us and we win, I don't care. That doesn't matter. I don't care about the footy tip.
And George, do we win?
I think we will win because we'll be forced into cranking ourselves into gear right from the very start, and there's too much at stake in this case. So I think this will be a cracking game, and we will play so much better than what we have in the last 2 games. And
I'm not sure yet. I'm really on the fence, and I'm trying to be as objective as possible and putting my objective hat on. I think we're a better footy team than them. So despite their home ground advantage, I think that we've got the perfect game plan for Port Adelaide. I reckon they're a bit flaky, and I think we'll win.
All right.
But still sitting on the fence. So I'll let you know how I go next week.
All right, fantastic. Well, we will be back next week. I'm not sure what day. We might do it earlier in the week, considering it's the Thursday game. But we'll see. Let's go those Demons.
Go Redlegs.